All right, what we're going to talk about today is why notes versus land contracts. Okay, first of all, I want just everyone to understand I'm not anti-land contract. All right, there are appropriate situations where land contract actually is a better option than notes. All right, but in the overall view, I believe that notes provide much more flexibility. They're a higher quality of paper, and notes in general have a much higher purchasing price or quality on the secondary market versus land contracts. So we're going to cover what I believe to be some of the advantages that notes provide over land contracts. And one of the first ones is that notes just seem to be more streamlined and much more flexible than what land contracts are. With a note, you can do a partial, and remember, a partial is essentially nothing more than someone purchasing a number of payments, a set stream of payments for a period of time. You can pledge a note. Banks do this all the time. They will pledge notes and borrow from other banks, the note portfolio that they have. You can do that on a one-to-one basis. So you can pledge the note, or it's also called hypothecation, and they're much easier to assign than with the land contract. They both can be done. It just requires a little more work with the land contract in assigning that contract and transferring the deed versus just having to assign the note, essentially just having to assign the mortgage or deed of trust in that respect. So I believe they're a little bit more streamlined, a little more flexible. Number two is that notes carry a lot less liability, all right, than what land contracts are. And one of the primary reasons for that is that you still own the property. Anything that goes on that property, you're still liable for. Whereas if you own the note, you're not responsible for the actions of the borrower. All right, you hold the paper. You don't own the asset. So there's a big difference there. If the neighborhood code would come and cite your property because of some type of deficiency, you as the owner of that property you're going to be the one to get citation. Now, it may be responsible of the contract for the person that's buying the home to get that taken care of. You may have that written into the contract, but what if it doesn't? It still falls back upon you, and you are ultimately the one that is liable for any actions in that respect. Another thing here is I hear a lot of people who do land contracts, they say, well, I can write it so that if up until they get a certain amount of equity, I can just evict and convert it into a rental. And some states allow you to do that. Some states don't. Okay. In Indiana, you still do. But what I would essentially tell you is that in the last year, there was a bill that was presented to the Indiana legislature that essentially, if the contract buyer had 5% equity position into the home, you would be forced to foreclose rather than just evict. So what I would tell you is that you need to be playing where the ball is heading. This is an issue that's happening throughout the entire country, just not here in Indiana. Now, that bill got defeated, all right, but I fully anticipate down the road that is going to, the position of equity, the equity position for the contract buyer, that is gradually going to erode and get lower. Currently, it's around 20%, and depending upon how liberal a judge might be, it could be as low as 15%. But the statute right now, unless it's just recently changed, is still at 20%. So yes, you may be able to just evict, all right, and that would be an advantage from a land contract. But what I would propose to you is this: why not get the 15 and 20% down payment right up front, get a better quality buyer than someone who's only putting $1,000 or $2,000 down, collect that money up front, that's in your pocket, and the likelihood that that person is going to perform is much, much greater. Typical land contracts, how they're written in this area anyway, what we see, is a third to half of those will never perform over the long term because there's just not enough skin in the game. All right, we teach, we encourage, have a minimum of at least 10%, and quite honestly, most of our notes that we create, they have more than that. Typically, it's around 15 to 18% is where most of those are. So I think the advantage for the long term, you're trying to create long-term wealth in this situation, lends itself more towards the notes because you're getting a much larger down payment up front. Again, you're wanting to do this in good areas with good homes, not bottom-end homes. And then finally, it's just with notes, you do have the right, all right, to take the property back. But at the same token, you can invest so much easier with notes anywhere in the country. All right, you have the exclusive rights to be able to take the home back if the borrower defaults. Now, if you have a long land contract in other parts of the country, it's not going to be a big deal unless that land contract buyer defaults. Now you've got to have a whole team in a whole different area, a different state. You don't know the rules, all right, unless you have some familiarity in already investing there in some other ways. But the bottom line is you are at a much greater disadvantage not knowing the rules in that particular community where you're at. So these are two of the reasons. We've got two more to cover, but we'll cover that in another video. All right, we're back here for the next two advantages I believe that notes provide over land contracts. All right, and number 3 on this list is that notes command a higher price on the secondary market. If you're in a position and that you need to liquidate to create capital, maybe you find a better deal, all right, there's something that you want to do, you're going to get a higher value, a higher dollar value for a note in a mortgage or a note in deed and trust versus a land contract. Just from the standpoint of what we've talked about in the past, all right, with the flexibility that notes have. Now, you're still going to get money. There's no question about that. But the market just tends to lend itself. More buyers tends to push to a greater price with notes and mortgages versus land contracts. All right. To give you an example, with a note and mortgage, all right, if it's well created, well documented, you can get paid as much as 97% of what the unpaid principal balance is that's on that note. That is much higher than what you would probably see with a land contract. The fourth one then, notes are just viewed as being much more professional, all right, rather than the land contracts. Land contracts are kind of viewed as being more as the novice, all right, and I say that from the standpoint that we in the Midwest here we've always talked about land contracts and it's done with land contracts, but the vast majority of the rest of the country does more notes, all right, and deed of trust. So if you're underwriting, you're certainly underwriting a borrower much better. So many land contracts that we see, the borrower, we have not seen them underwritten in any way, all right, or any fashion. Many times they haven't even looked at what the credit score is. They haven't documented what the income is that they're making. Those are all things that really need to be done. And if you've got someone that you're selling a property to with a land contract, and they're putting 20% down, all right, and you vetted them out, then okay, that's fine, all right. I'm not against that, but I would still say you have more flexibility with a note than you would with a land contract and have more value on the secondary market. So it's just viewed as being much more professional. The deed transfers, remember the deed transfers with a note and mortgage, and as a result, the borrower, all right, has the pride of home ownership. They got the deed. They own it, okay? This is a huge psychological advantage for the borrower. Whereas in the land contract, All right, again, that deed doesn't transfer until they have finished paying. It's way too easy to walk away. So there's a psychological issue here as well from the borrower's standpoint. There's one more thing that I almost forgot about concerning that notes are viewed as being more professional. With the note and a mortgage, your borrower can essentially apply and receive a homestead and mortgage exemption on their property. All right, it's automatic with the transfer of the deed. All they have to do is go and apply it. This makes a huge impact on the amount of property taxes that the borrower is paying, and as a result lowers their overall payment for the home. Now, that can be also done for a land contract, but only if the owner of the land contract records the contract. And I know in this area that there's many people, many investors that do not record their land contracts. Again, what happens is that your borrower or your land contract buyer may be responsible for paying the taxes and insurance, all right, but if they're not able to apply for that mortgage exemption and the homestead exemption, you have just increased the amount of their payment tremendously, all right, and as a result, all right, the likelihood of them continuing to perform over the long term is decreased as a result of that. So it's one last thing to think of in that respect. And I would also say one final point as well is that typically for a note and a mortgage, a down payment tends to be greater than with a land contract. Not always, okay, but I would say as a general rule, all right, in that respect. So hope that helps. These are the things I believe that are the most important factors of why notes tend to have a little bit more advantages over land contracts.